In front of me, you can see I have one of the most coveted pieces of wild game. It's the tenderloin from white-tailed deer. I love it. But you can see it's not very big. It might serve one or maybe two people at the most. But this breakfast recipe I'm going to show you today uses a few really great techniques, and it's a good way to take a tenderloin and maybe serve as many as 4 or 5 people. We're gonna do a potato roasty, which is really just a hash brown, so I'll show you that technique. We're gonna saute this beautiful tenderloin, and then we'll use some farm fresh eggs, and rather than frying them, we'll poach. So it's gonna be a poached egg with the tenderloin and potato roasty. You're gonna love it. Now, the first thing I have to do is shred the potato, and I'll show you how to get the best results from doing that. When you're using a box grater, make sure the base is good and firm so it doesn't jump around on you. And then putting the potato at about a 45, start shredding. You can see I've got a bowl prepared ahead of time, and it's really important to take this and put it into the cold water. That will do a couple things. It'll get some of the starch off, but at the same time, it'll keep it from discoloring and changing its appearance. Now, to make these potato roasty incredible, I'm going to use an onion. Now, you could use a shallot or an onion, but for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to use a yellow onion. Remove the root tip and then the tip of the onion. It'll lie flat. Slice it in half. Peel off a layer or two, depending on how fresh the onion is. And then, not slicing across, slice up and down so you get nice thin slices or julienne of the onion. I'm going to use the same pan for the tenderloin that I do for the roasty. There'll be lots of flavor in there, and there's no reason to make a bigger mess. I've got both the camelina oil and the butter together. You see, as soon as that butter's bubbled, it's ready to go. So with the tenderloin going in, make sure to lie it in when you do away from you, just so that when you set it down, it doesn't splash on you. Next, pepper, a good amount of pepper, and a good amount of salt. It's really important to make sure that the pan is really hot, to make sure that I get a really nice crust, and so that I can get it in the pan and get it out. Because let's face it, this is going to be better medium rare or even medium than it will be fully cooked. With the temperature on high, you've seen this before, I know. This does a couple things. This will continue to cook the top of the tenderloin, but more importantly, it'll make sure that the butter doesn't overheat to burn. The reason that I finish the tenderloin first is for a couple reasons. First of all, it's perfectly cooked. You can see how beautifully brown it is. I can still feel that it's nice and tender on the inside, but this can actually rest just like this at room temperature. And the longer it rests, frankly, the better it's going to be. Now, when I slice this, it's going to be juicy. I won't lose all of those juices out onto the cutting board. So setting this aside and getting this finished ahead of time takes out all the stress. Let's take a quick break from this recipe and answer viewer questions. The first question from Henko Venter. He wants to know what type of marinade I use for venison. Hanko, the first thing that you want to do is establish what type of cuisine are you going to be using. Is it Japanese? Is it Mexican? Is it something French? And that'll tell you a little bit about the ingredients you want to use. So I always use an acid, so it can be something like citrus, could be pineapple. You can even use vinegar, okay? And for flavor bases, you want to get something that is both spicy and a fresh herb. So often, if I'm using venison, I'd like to use something like fresh thyme or rosemary, even summer savory or sage to get that flavor in. The other thing that you want to make sure to do is put a little bit of oil in there. It's surprising how much flavor comes from oil. The one thing to avoid is salt. We don't want to begin cooking or curing any of this meat. The seasoning will leave until just before it goes into the broil or into the pan. Think about what type of cuisine that you want and then add some of the classic ingredients that go along with that cuisine. Bearded Beast Barbecue asks, that's quite a name, Asked, do I ever use a pellet grill when I'm cooking venison? Listen, I always use my Louisiana grill when I'm firing venison, and I'll tell you why. Pellet grills combine some of the best control methods. You get the right temperature. You can use a probe thermometer, so you not only get the internal temperature right, but you get that smoke. So you'll get a beautiful smoke ring, nice even heat, and it's a great way to add flavor to venison. Venison has tons of flavor. The one thing I always make sure to do with my roast, trim that tallow off, get it cleaned up, take off any of the connective tissue, put in the probe. You want to reach somewhere around 135 to 145 degrees, depending on the doneness, and I love my pellet grill. Now, Chase Grossman asked, what's the best way to cook a backstrap? I'd say anyway, but in all seriousness, he asked grill, skillet, smoker. Backstrap is so versatile that as long as you get that connective tissue removed, you can add spices, you can add herbs, but there's so much natural flavor in venison. What I would recommend is that if it goes on a skillet, make sure the skillet is good and hot. If it's going into a smoker, make sure, again, it's preheated and you've got a good smoke rolling beforehand. If you braise it because you wanted to do pulled venison, make sure you give it enough time, 2 to 3 hours, to really break down and get the right consistency. But every time you choose a cooking method, make sure you follow the steps so that you'll get the right texture, the right flavor, and make sure that venison stays juicy. Amy Gargas asked, what's the best thing to do with ground venison? Well, Amy, the very first thing you want to make sure to do is to remove the tallow before you ever grind. That tallow has a very waxy and unpleasant flavor. It'll make it more gamey than it needs to be. Then when you do grind it, there's nothing like ground venison for making classics. I mean, I love a burger or even a meatloaf, but honestly, one of my favorites is making lasagna. So venison is so bold flavored and it's so easy to elevate everyday dishes. I'd use that ground venison anywhere. Thank you to all of our viewers for their questions. Let's get back to the recipe. Now have a look at this. You can see the color of the water has changed just slightly from the potato, and now it's time to drain. I'm going to use the same pan that I did for the tenderloin, but the first thing I want to do is just simply drain off the majority of this liquid. Once it's drained, the next step is to actually wring out, to squeeze out any of the additional water, and then combine with it fresh thyme, beautiful, fragrant fresh thyme, and the onions. These together will make a beautiful roasty. Just strip off the thyme leaves, pull them off in the opposite direction that they grow, so they grow this way, so just strip them back. This is a fairly woody stem that'll be difficult to chew on or digest, and literally just begin to assemble these on the board. So I've got these nice thin slices of onion, and all I'm going to do is just mix this together right on the cutting board so that it's evenly combined, and then when I do, I'll form the tiny little roasty. When it comes to assembling these roasty, I want them to be high and tight. So make something that's about the size of the palm of your hand, press it down just slightly, and then it goes straight over and into the pan. You can see I've got one in here already. Press it down firmly, and you can see the nice thing is all that flavor that's developed in the bottom of the pan, that's gonna carry over right into those little hash browns. With the roasty on, the one thing that you have to do is always season in layers. So I'm making sure to get some salt and pepper on these as they roast away. Now the nice thing about the roasty is that they're not too fussy. So you can work on other things, and as long as the temperature's not too high, they won't burn. Now I've got some hot water here. I'm going to start by making a vortex. I'm going in one direction, so literally whisking in one direction. Now you see I don't have a rapid boil, but I do have a good boil going. This is white vinegar. Put about a teaspoon or a bit more in. And what the vinegar does is it helps the egg to coagulate. So while I put it in, and just a little bit of seasoning, so a little bit of salt will season that water, as always. And then in goes the egg, and you can see gently come right near the surface and drop it in. And what happens is it'll hold, that vortex will hold the egg together, and I'll have perfect poached eggs. After just a couple minutes, these are ready to turn. You can see that the onion is crispy and that is just like a hash brown, but it's got a ton of texture. Remember, we're gonna have that beautifully soft egg and that beautiful venison, so we wanna make sure there's a little bit of texture. That's why we're doing crispy potatoes, nice soft yolk, and then that gorgeous venison. Now make sure you don't pull the poached eggs out too soon. It's a common mistake to think they're finished and then you'll open them up and the whites will still be quite runny. Make sure to drain them completely on some brown paper or even on a cloth. But you can see those are cooked to perfection and they're ready to go. You can see when you have a glance at this tenderloin that it's just cooked to perfection. You have that beautiful pink on the inside. You'll notice on the board is actually quite dry. So none of that beautiful liquid that you need, that juiciness is gonna be missed. Now have a look at this. Imagine this, the crispy roasty, some nice acidity from tomatoes, the beautiful tenderloin sliced, a couple soft poached eggs. This as a complete dish, it's gonna be rich, it's gonna be creamy, and it's a great way to really have whitetail, to share it with others, and to maybe have it go a little bit further than just enjoying it yourself. This will make a great wild at table recipe for breakfast.